Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. If you've spent even 5 minutes in a drama department, you've definitely heard this debate echoing through the halls. You know the one, the classic old versus new argument. One side says they just don't write them like they used to, and the other fires back with old Broadway was just so stiff. Well, today we're moving past these subjective opinions to deconstruct the actual structural shifts of the craft. We are putting the Golden Age and the modern musical head to head. All right, let's dive right into this. Here's our roadmap for today. 1. Defining the two eras. 2. Shifts in musical structure. 3. Evolution of narrative arcs. 4. Expanding the protagonist. 5. Spectacle and stagecraft. And finally, 6. The ongoing Broadway conversation. Let's get to it. So, let's kick things off with a slightly provocative question. Are these two eras really at war? Look, it is so easy to fall into the trap of thinking one era is just inherently superior to the other. But as students of the craft, we absolutely have to challenge that false binary. This explainer isn't some competition to crown a winner. It's a study of deliberate aesthetic evolution. The medium didn't change because people suddenly forgot how to write a good standard. It changed because what audiences needed from the theater changed. Section 1. Defining the two eras. When theater historians talk about the Golden Age, they're usually pointing to a very specific, roughly 30-year window. It kicks off around 1943 with the premiere of Rodgers and Hammerstein's Oklahoma and wraps up in the late 1960s. This was the undisputed playground of legends like Lerner and Loewe, Frank Loesser, Jewel Stein, and the early works of Stephen Sondheim. Now, if we fast forward through the mega musicals of the 80s and 90s, we hit the modern era. And this era truly begins defining its own distinct rulebook from the mid-2000s onward. Now, the defining structural achievement of the Golden Age is this concept right here, the integrated musical. Before 1943, a lot of Broadway shows were essentially just variety acts. You had a super flimsy plot, and its only job was to connect totally unrelated song and dance numbers. But Oklahoma pioneered a totally radical structural concept. Suddenly, every single song, every pirouette, every line of dialogue had to serve the story and grow naturally out of the character's situation. Nothing was filler. It created this incredibly rigid, brilliant baseline for cohesive storytelling. But then the modern era came along and basically decided to take that integrated baseline and completely rewrite the rules. The modern landscape is defined by totally different hallmarks. We're seeing jukebox musicals that seamlessly weave existing pop catalogs into actual dramatic narratives, like in Juliet. We're seeing concept albums adapted for the stage, like Hadestown. And we're seeing shows like Hamilton entirely break the mold of what a musical can even sound like. The form has become incredibly, deliberately eclectic. Section 2. Shifts in musical structure. Golden Age scores were the absolute pinnacle of the American songbook tradition. We are talking deep Tin Pan Alley roots, lush jazz harmonies, and these sophisticated, elegant structures that relied heavily on the verse-chorus form. Think about the sweeping melodic richness of Some Enchanted Evening from South Pacific. Modern scores, by contrast, harness the eclectic energy of a streaming playlist. Lin-Manuel Miranda fused hip-hop, R&B, and even Gilbert and Sullivan in Hamilton. Six operates entirely as a high-octane pop concert with a historical thesis. The music just isn't confined to that traditional show tune sound anymore. 8. Just 8. That's a pretty small number, right? Well, that represents the size of some modern pit orchestras. Back in the Golden Age, legendary orchestrators like Robert Russell Bennett were writing for massive 28 to 30-piece acoustic sections. We're talking full strings, brass, and woodwinds that could fill a house without heavy amplification. Today, modern pits have shrunk big time. You might have just 8 musicians, sometimes even fewer, using synthesizers to fill out the sound. And while that's partly driven by economics, it's also a very deliberate aesthetic choice to capture a raw, stripped-down, band-on-the-stage energy. Section 3. Evolution of narrative arcs. Structurally speaking, Golden Age musicals relied heavily on optimism and resolution. Boy meets girl, they face an obstacle, love conquers all, and the curtain falls. Even when they were tackling incredibly heavy themes like racism in South Pacific or gang violence in West Side Story, the structural arcs still provided moral clarity. You generally knew who the heroes were. Modern musicals, they've largely abandoned that neatness. They are deeply comfortable with ambiguity. A show like Dear Evan Hansen actually forces the audience to empathize with a protagonist who does genuinely harmful things. Fun Home wades through complex, unresolved grief and messy sexuality, and it does it without tying everything up with a neat little bow. I absolutely love this insight about Hadestown. It's such a brilliant modern subversion of traditional linear storytelling. By literally telling you the tragic ending in the opening number, the writers completely strip away the suspense of what will happen. Instead, they force the audience to engage entirely with how and why it happens. It's a structural dare. It demands a totally different kind of emotional engagement from you than a Golden Age fairy tale ever would. Section 4. Expanding the protagonist. If you look back at the Golden Age, the protagonists were, frankly, incredibly narrow. The story centered almost exclusively on white, heterosexual, often upper-middle-class characters. The modern era represents a massive, absolutely necessary structural shift in centering marginalized voices. Hamilton famously reimagined the Founding Fathers as people of color. The revival of the color purple brought Black women's joy and pain to the absolute forefront of the stage. And A Strange Loop broke incredible ground by putting a queer Black man at the absolute center of his own psychological universe. This isn't just a casting change, guys. It is a fundamental shift in who Broadway believes these stories belong to. Section 5. Spectacle and Stagecraft. Theater traditionalists often complain that today's shows rely on fancy turntables and LED screens just to mask thin dramatic writing. But let's be historically accurate for a second. Spectacle is not a modern invention. Anyone remember the Ziegfeld Follies? What has actually changed is the medium of the spectacle. The Golden Age relied on physical grandeur, massive, sweeping physical sets, and precision choreography, like Agnes DeMille's breathtaking 1943 Dream Ballet in Oklahoma. Modern spectacle, on the other hand, relies heavily on technological magic, innovative sound design, advanced lighting, and sheer sensory overload, much like the fever dream that is Moulin Rouge. When you break it down, the core truth is this. The goal hasn't changed, only the tools have. In the Golden Age, Oklahoma used choreography to achieve deep physical storytelling. In the modern era, a show like Harry Potter and the Cursed Child uses unprecedented stagecraft to create completely immersive magic. Or think of Hadestown, using an industrial minimalist set to cultivate a very real sense of mythological dread. In both eras, the very best productions use their specific brand of spectacle strictly in service of the story. The worst use it as a substitute. Section 6. The ongoing Broadway conversation. The truth is that these eras aren't in competition. They're in conversation. This perfectly captures the whole thesis of our explainer today. The Golden Age perfected the standard. They crafted melodies that have literally ingrained themselves into our cultural fabric for 70 years. They built the integrated book musical that every writer today still studies. The modern era, in turn, gets representation right. It embraces a diversity of form, it's totally willing to make audiences uncomfortable, and crucially, it acts as a gateway for entirely new generations of theatergoers. Every modern composer working today grew up studying Sondheim, Rodgers, and Hammerstein. They are taking that integrated foundation and they're building entirely new mansions on top of it. Which leaves us with this final thought for all of you. If the Golden Age masters were alive today, they'd likely be thrilled to see how the form has been stretched, challenged, and completely reinvented. The evolution of Broadway isn't stopping with the modern era we just discussed. It is an ongoing, living, breathing process. So as you study these structural lessons, as you dissect the old and the new, the real question is, how will your generation take these tools and push the art form into its next inevitable era? Keep studying, keep writing, and we'll see you in the theater.